I was 29 years old, engaged for 8 months, and 4 days away from getting married when my entire future was erased by a single text message on a random Wednesday afternoon in downtown Seattle. I remember exactly where I was when it happened. I was sitting at my desk on the 32nd floor, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like they were slowly draining whatever soul I had left. My coffee had gone cold sometime during the third back-to-back client meeting of the day. My shoulders ached, my jaw was tight. I was already questioning my life choices before my phone even vibrated. The notification was from Daniel Mitchell, my fiancé. The man I was supposed to marry in exactly 4 days. The man whose last name I was about to take. The man whose family I'd been calling mine for months. I expected wedding chaos, something harmless, something exhausting but normal. Did you confirm the flowers? My mom wants table 6 closer to the band. Do you think ivory napkins clash with champagne tablecloths? Instead, I got this. Wedding's still on, but I'm spending the last few nights before it with my ex-girlfriend Lily for closure. Hope you understand. I stared at the screen like it was written in a language my brain refused to recognize. Read it again, slower this time. Still the same words. My chest went tight. My fingers went numb. That strange ringing started in my ears, the one that shows up when your body knows something is wrong before your mind catches up. Lily Morrison. The woman Daniel had sworn was ancient history. The one he said meant nothing. The one whose name I was told not to worry about. The one who somehow still liked his photos at 2 a.m. and always seemed to be, coincidentally, at the same bars we went to. Closure. 4 days before our wedding. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even stand up. I just sat there, frozen, watching my entire future collapse in silence, while the office around me kept moving, keyboards clicking, phones ringing, someone laughing too loudly near the printer. And in that moment, before I replied, before I reacted, before I did anything at all, I knew. The wedding was already dead. I was just the only one who understood it yet. Before that text message detonated my life, I genuinely believed I was doing everything right. I was 29, working as an account manager in a mid-sized consulting firm downtown. Not glamorous, but stable, structured, predictable in the way adult life is supposed to be once you've stopped chasing chaos and started valuing peace. I paid my bills on time. I planned ahead. I believed in commitment, in showing up, in building something slowly instead of burning brightly and burning out. Daniel fit into that vision. At least I thought he did. We met 2 years earlier at a mutual friend's birthday dinner. I remember noticing him because he listened. Not in a performative way, not with interruptions or clever one-liners queued up for attention. He asked questions. Follow-ups. When I talked about work, he didn't glaze over. When I talked about my childhood, he didn't rush to relate it back to himself. That mattered to me. Our relationship unfolded the way people like to call easy. Dates turned into routines, routines turned into shared spaces turned into plans. He moved into my apartment after 8 months, joking that it made no sense to pay 2 rents when we were practically living together anyway. I believed him. Looking back, I see how often I was the one adjusting. My schedule, my expectations, my emotional bandwidth. Daniel was charming, social, effortlessly likable. The kind of man whose parents adored him and whose friends always gave him the benefit of the doubt. His family embraced me quickly, almost aggressively so. His mother, Linda, had opinions about everything. My hair, my dress choices, how I set the table. His father, Roger, was quieter but observant, always measuring. His sister treated me like I was on a permanent audition. I told myself it was normal. Families are complicated. Love requires patience. The proposal came a year into the relationship. Daniel planned it well. Sunset, a scenic overlook, just the two of us. He got down on one knee, said all the right words, held out a ring that sparkled in the fading light. I said yes. Not because I was swept away by romance, but because I truly believed we were choosing each other with open eyes. The months that followed were loud. Wedding planning has a way of amplifying everything. Personalities, fault lines, power dynamics. Daniel became distant in subtle ways. Longer nights out, more time on his phone, vague explanations that somehow always sounded reasonable when I questioned them. And then there was Lily. Ancient history doesn't text at midnight. Ancient history doesn't like every photo. Ancient history doesn't resurface when commitments become real. But I ignored the unease because I wanted to believe in the version of my life I had already committed to. Because doubt felt like failure. Because admitting something was wrong would mean admitting I might have chosen incorrectly. 4 days before the wedding, I was still telling myself this was just stress. I had no idea that the person I trusted most was already mentally halfway out the door, dragging the past back into our present and calling it closure. And I had no idea how close I was to losing everything I thought I was building. The truth is, the warning signs didn't arrive all at once. They slipped in quietly, disguised as small inconveniences, minor discomforts. Things I told myself not to overthink because every relationship has flaws. Daniel started becoming vague in ways that were hard to challenge without sounding paranoid. Plans shifted last minute. Messages went unanswered for hours. Conversations ended with, "You're reading too much into this." When I asked where he'd been, the answers were technically complete, but emotionally empty. Out with friends. Just grabbing drinks. Long day, needed air. Nothing concrete enough to argue with. Nothing solid enough to accuse. His phone became an extension of his body. Screen angled away, notifications silenced. If I walked into the room, he'd swipe reflexively, too fast, too practiced. When I joked about it, he laughed it off and kissed my forehead like I was adorable for even asking. "Relax," he'd say. "You trust me, right?" And I did. Or at least, I wanted to. Lily's name began to surface more often, not directly, but indirectly. A mutual friend mentioning she'd run into her. A casual reference to a place they used to go together. Stories that ended just before they reached anything uncomfortable. Daniel never brought her up on his own, but when she appeared, he was oddly defensive, too quick to clarify, too eager to reassure. "She's not important," he said once, almost sharply. "Why are you so focused on her?" I backed off immediately, apologizing for making it a thing. That became the pattern. If something bothered me, it was reframed as insecurity. If I questioned a behavior, it was labeled stress. If I pushed, I was adding pressure during an already intense time. His family didn't help. Linda had a talent for planting doubt without ever taking responsibility for it. Comments slipped in between compliments. "You know Daniel's very social. He's always had lots of close friendships. Men don't process emotions the same way women do." Translation? Adapt. Even his sister joked once, half smiling, "You're marrying a complicated man." I laughed along, ignoring the way my stomach tightened. As the wedding approached, the distance grew. Daniel spent more nights clearing his head. He claimed the pressure of commitment was making him reflective, that he just needed space to feel ready. I gave it to him. I told myself love meant flexibility, that trust meant not monitoring, that confidence meant not demanding reassurance. What I didn't realize was that I was slowly training myself to accept less. Less communication, less presence, less respect. The night before the text, he barely spoke to me. Ate dinner distractedly, kissed my cheek instead of my lips. Said he was meeting an old friend to talk things through. I didn't ask which one, because somewhere deep down, a part of me already knew. I just wasn't ready to say it out loud. When that message finally arrived, casual, careless, devastating, It didn't feel like a sudden betrayal. It felt like the moment everything I'd been avoiding finally stepped into the light. And once it did, there was no pretending anymore. I didn't respond right away. My phone sat face up on my desk, the message still glowing like it might burn straight through the screen. Around me, the office hummed on. Someone microwaving leftovers, a printer jamming, a coworker sighing dramatically during a call. Normal life continuing uninterrupted, while mine cracked cleanly in half. I reread the text for the 4th time. Wedding's still on, but I'm spending the last few nights before it with my ex-girlfriend Lily for closure. Hope you understand. My hands started shaking then, not violently, subtly, a fine tremor that ran from my fingers up my forearms, like my body was bracing for impact. I thought about calling him, demanding an explanation, hearing his voice, but I already knew how that would go. He'd sound calm, reasonable, slightly wounded that I didn't immediately support his emotional growth. So instead, I typed, "Do what you need to do." I stared at the words before sending them, aware on some level that I was crossing a line I might not be able to uncross. They didn't reflect how I felt. They reflected who I had trained myself to be in this relationship, accommodating, patient, endlessly understanding. I hit send. The reply came almost instantly. "You're amazing, truly. This is why I'm marrying you. You're so mature and secure." I let out a short, humorless breath that might have been a laugh if it hadn't tasted like metal. Mature. Secure. Because I wasn't objecting to my fiancé sleeping in the same space as his ex-girlfriend days before our wedding. Because I wasn't making it dramatic. I set my phone down and leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling tiles. Something inside me went very still. The panic didn't come. The tears didn't come. What came instead was clarity. It was sharp, clean, almost peaceful. This wasn't confusion. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was who he was and who he believed I was willing to be. And in that moment, I knew with absolute certainty, I could not marry this man. Not after this. Not ever. The wedding didn't feel in danger. It felt finished, like a structure that had already collapsed. I was just standing in the dust. I picked up my phone again, not to argue, not to negotiate, but to act. The first call was to the venue. "Sunset Manor, this is Jennifer," a cheerful voice answered. "How can I make your special day perfect?" "My name is Emma Rodriguez," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "I need to cancel the wedding scheduled for Saturday. All of it." Silence. "I'm sorry. Did you say cancel?" "Yes," I replied, "the entire event, effective immediately." She began reciting policy, deposits, penalties, less than 72 hours notice. I let her finish. "That's fine," I said when she paused. "Charge whatever applies. Just make sure no one shows up expecting a wedding." After I hung up, something shifted in my chest. Not relief exactly, but release. I called the florist, the caterer, the DJ. Each conversation felt surreal, like I was dismantling a life that had existed only on paper and in promises. Some tried to talk me out of it. Some sounded confused. One asked gently if everything was okay. "No," I said honestly, "but it will be." By the time I called the honeymoon resort, my hands had stopped shaking. "I need to cancel our reservation," I told the woman on the line. "We won't be needing it." "Oh no," she said softly. "Is everything all right?" I thought of Daniel, of Lily, of that word, closure, used like a weapon. "No," I said, "but it's for the best." When the calls were done, my phone battery was nearly dead, and so was the version of my life I'd been planning. I sat there in my office chair, staring out at the Seattle skyline, realizing I had just ended my engagement without a single raised voice. And for the first time since that text arrived, I felt something close to control. The adrenaline didn't hit until later. At first, I moved through the rest of the afternoon on autopilot. I finished emails, I nodded through conversations, I smiled at a coworker who joked about surviving another Wednesday. No one noticed anything was wrong, which felt both surreal and cruel. It wasn't until I got into my car, shut the door, and sat in silence that my body finally caught up with what my mind had already accepted. My hands went slack on the steering wheel. My chest tightened, not enough to steal my breath, but enough to make every inhale deliberate. I stared straight ahead, watching pedestrians cross the street, completely unaware that the woman sitting 10 feet away had just dismantled her entire future. I didn't cry. That surprised me. Instead, a flood of questions rushed in, one after another, relentless and sharp. How long had this been going on? When did Lily stop being the past? How many moments had I smiled through while he was emotionally somewhere else? I replayed conversations I'd brushed aside. The nights he came home late, smelling like unfamiliar cologne. The way he'd grown irritable when I asked simple questions. The subtle shift from we to me in his language. I wasn't angry yet. I was dissecting. At home, the apartment felt unfamiliar, like a place I'd outgrown without realizing it. Daniel's shoes were by the door. His jacket hung over the chair. Evidence of a life we were supposed to continue building together. I walked through each room slowly, noticing things I'd stopped seeing. How much of the space catered to his preferences. How many of my own had been minimized. I sat on the edge of the bed and finally picked up my phone again. No new messages from him. That, more than anything, hurt. He knew what he'd said. He knew how explosive it was. And still, he hadn't checked in, hadn't asked how I was taking it, hadn't clarified, hadn't reconsidered. Because in his mind, this was reasonable. I called my best friend, Alex Chen, the one person who had known me long enough to hear the truth, even when I tried to soften it. "Alex," I said the moment he answered, "I need you to sit down." There was a pause. "That bad?" "Yes." I forwarded him the text. I waited. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully calm, in the way people get when they're trying not to say something unforgivable. "He thought you'd be okay with this," he said slowly. He genuinely believed this was acceptable. "I think he thought it was mature," I replied, "that I'd support him." Alex exhaled sharply. "Emma, this isn't closure. This is entitlement." Hearing someone else name it made my throat tighten. "I canceled everything," I said. "The wedding, the honeymoon, all of it." Another pause, then, "I'm proud of you." Those words cracked something open, not into sobs, but into release. I leaned back against the headboard, staring at the ceiling, letting the weight of the day settle. That night, I didn't confront Daniel. I didn't send long messages or ultimatums. I didn't demand explanations. I watched. I watched his social media update with photos from a bar I recognized. I watched Lily tagged in the background of someone else's story. I watched him live his life as if nothing irreversible had happened. And with every minute that passed, my shock hardened into resolve. I wasn't reacting impulsively. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't ruining anything. I was responding to the truth, and the truth was simple, even if it hurt. A man who could ask this of me 4 days before our wedding was not a man I could trust with a lifetime. By the time I lay down to sleep, exhaustion finally overtook me. I stared at the dark ceiling, listening to the hum of the city outside, knowing that the confrontation would come, but also knowing something else, something just as important. Whatever happened next, I was done shrinking to make room for someone else's betrayal. The escalation didn't arrive as one dramatic explosion. It came in waves. The first wave hit the next morning. I woke up to 6 missed calls from Daniel and a string of messages that swung wildly between confusion and irritation. "Why are vendors calling me? Did you cancel something? Emma, this isn't funny. Call me." I read them slowly, sitting at the kitchen table with a mug of untouched coffee. His tone wasn't apologetic. It wasn't worried. It was inconvenienced, like I'd rearranged furniture without asking. I waited until my pulse slowed before replying. Yes, I canceled the wedding. 3 dots appeared almost instantly. What are you talking about? You said I could do what I needed to do. You're blowing this way out of proportion. There it was, the reframing, the selective memory. I typed, erased, typed again. Doing what you needed to do doesn't include asking me to tolerate you reconnecting with your ex days before our wedding. The response came back sharp. It was about closure. You're being emotional. My family thinks you're panicking. That's when the second wave hit. His family. Linda called first. She didn't say hello. Emma, you need to stop this immediately, she said. Daniel is distraught. This is not how a stable woman behaves days before a wedding. I closed my eyes, counting to 3. He told me he was spending the nights before our wedding with his ex-girlfriend, I said. I responded appropriately. There was a scoff. You're twisting his words. Lily is part of his emotional history. Mature couples allow space for that. Allow space, as if betrayal were a yoga pose. His sister texted next, followed by 2 cousins I barely knew. The messages echoed the same theme: concern, disappointment, subtle accusation. He didn't cheat. You're embarrassing him. Do you really want to be known as the woman who ran away? By noon, the narrative had been quietly rewritten. I wasn't a woman responding to a breach of trust. I was unstable, insecure, overreacting under pressure. Daniel called again in the afternoon. I don't recognize you right now, he said, his voice tight with frustration. You're acting irrational. I felt something inside me shift, not into anger, but into distance. This is who I am when I respect myself, I replied. You just haven't seen it before. He went silent. Then softly, almost kindly, he said, You're going to regret this. That was the third wave. The threat disguised as concern. That evening, more evidence surfaced without me even looking for it. A mutual friend sent me screenshots. Daniel and Lily tagged together at a rooftop bar the night before. Close, familiar, comfortable in a way people don't get overnight. Another friend messaged, hesitant. I didn't know if I should say this, but they've been talking for months. Months. The word landed heavily in my chest. Suddenly, the puzzle pieces I'd been stepping around clicked into place. The late nights, the defensiveness, the emotional distance. This wasn't an impulsive need for closure. This was a slow retreat. I didn't respond to Daniel after that. Instead, I packed. Not everything, just what was mine. Clothes, books, my laptop. Small items that had quietly lost their sense of permanence. I placed the engagement ring, the one he'd given me, on the kitchen counter. I didn't throw it. I didn't hide it. I left it where he'd see it. That night, I stayed with Alex. He didn't ask questions. He handed me tea and let me sit in silence until I was ready to speak. You're not wrong, he said eventually. They're just loud. By the time Daniel showed up unannounced at Alex's building with his parents the next evening, voices raised, demands flying, security called, I was already emotionally gone. When he yelled through the intercom, "You're destroying everything!" I felt something unexpected, relief, because I finally saw it clearly. The escalation wasn't about love or loss. It was about control, and I wasn't giving it back. The dark moment didn't look dramatic from the outside. There were no screaming matches, no broken furniture, no public scene where I collapsed into tears while strangers stared. It was quieter than that. It came late at night, after the noise died down, after the calls stopped, after the messages slowed, after the adrenaline faded and there was nothing left to distract me from myself. I was lying on the couch at Alex's apartment, the city lights bleeding in through the windows, painting faint reflections across the ceiling. Alex had gone to bed. The apartment was silent except for the low hum of traffic far below. That's when the weight finally settled. Not just the end of the engagement, but the realization of how much of myself I had quietly surrendered without noticing. I replayed moments I'd defended at the time, the times I'd apologized first just to keep the peace, the nights I'd swallowed discomfort because it wasn't worth the fight, the subtle ways I'd learned to anticipate Daniel's moods before my own. I wasn't grieving him. I was grieving the version of myself I thought I'd be by now, married, secure, settled into a life that made sense. Instead, I was 30 days from 30, sleeping on a friend's couch, my wedding dress hanging unused in a closet somewhere, my future suddenly blank. And that blankness was terrifying. I wondered if everyone was right, if I had overreacted, if I'd been too rigid, too proud, too unwilling to work through something uncomfortable. The doubt crept in slowly, methodically. What if it really was just closure? What if I'd thrown away something salvageable? What if this was the price of modern relationships and I just wasn't evolved enough to pay it? I stared at the ceiling, my chest aching in a way that felt physical, like pressure pushing outward from my ribs. The loneliness was sharp, not the kind that comes from being alone, but the kind that comes from feeling unseen, like no one fully understood what it had cost me to walk away. My phone buzzed softly beside me. A message from Daniel. I never meant to hurt you. I just needed to understand my past before committing to our future. I wish you'd trusted me. The words sat there, perfectly composed, polished enough to sound reasonable to anyone who hadn't lived inside our relationship. I typed a response, deleted it, typed another, deleted that too, because no combination of words could bridge the gap between what he wanted and what I needed. That's when the lowest thought hit, the one I didn't want to admit even to myself. What if this is it? What if this was my chance and I just ruined it? The fear wasn't about Daniel. It was about starting over, about explaining again, about trusting again, about risking my heart in a world where people labeled betrayal as emotional growth and called boundaries insecurity. For the first time since everything began, tears finally came. Not dramatic sobs, but quiet, relentless ones that soaked into the pillow while I pressed my face into the couch to muffle the sound. I let myself feel it fully. The loss, the exhaustion, the grief of a life that would never exist. And when the tears finally stopped, something unexpected happened. The doubt didn't win. Instead, a different thought surfaced, soft but steady. Even if this is lonely, it's honest. I wasn't twisting myself into something smaller to be loved. I wasn't negotiating my dignity for the promise of stability. I wasn't accepting behavior that hollowed me out just so I wouldn't have to be alone. That realization didn't make the pain disappear, but it anchored me. I wiped my face, took a slow breath, and looked at my phone one last time. I didn't reply to Daniel. I turned the screen face down. In that silence, in that moment of absolute emotional bottom, I understood something clearly for the first time. This pain was the cost of self-respect, and it was a price I was finally willing to pay. The turning point didn't arrive with fireworks. It arrived with evidence. The morning after that sleepless night, I woke to a message from someone I hadn't expected. Maya, Alex's girlfriend. We weren't close, but close enough. Practical, observant. The kind of woman who notices patterns and doesn't romanticize red flags. "Can we talk?" she wrote. "I think you should see something." We met at a quiet cafe a few blocks from Alex's apartment. Morning light streamed through the windows, catching the steam from our mugs. Maya slid her phone across the table without ceremony. "I didn't want to get involved," she said carefully. "But this isn't speculation anymore." On her screen were screenshots, messages, dates, timelines. Daniel and Lily hadn't just reconnected recently. They'd been talking for months. Late-night messages, inside jokes, emotional check-ins, plans disguised as coincidences. Not explicit, not graphic. Worse, intimate. The kind of intimacy that doesn't require physical proof to be real. "I cross-checked dates," Maya continued. "These line up with nights he said he was working late, or clearing his head." I felt my chest tighten, but this time it wasn't shock. It was confirmation. Something inside me steadied. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't bad timing. This wasn't a man confused by commitment. This was a man who had been emotionally elsewhere while standing beside me, letting me plan a future he was already undermining. As if that weren't enough, another message came through while I sat there. From Daniel's cousin, someone who had gone quiet after initially siding with him. I owe you an apology, it read. I didn't know the full story. Lily told me they'd never really stopped talking. She said you were too stable, and he felt trapped. Too stable. I almost laughed. What they called stable was my refusal to play games, my consistency, my expectation of honesty. I walked back to Alex's apartment alone, the city suddenly sharper, louder. Every step felt deliberate, like I was walking out of fog into clean air. That afternoon, Daniel showed up again, this time alone. No parents, no moral support, just him, standing in the hallway like a man who had finally realized his narrative wasn't holding. Can we talk? He asked quietly. I looked at him, really looked. The familiar face, the practiced sincerity, the faint irritation just beneath the surface. We can, I said, but I'm not negotiating. His shoulders dropped slightly. I never cheated. I met his eyes. You don't get to define betrayal for me. Silence. I saw the messages, I continued. The timelines. This wasn't closure. This was a parallel relationship. He opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time, he had nothing ready. I was scared, he said finally. Marriage felt permanent. Lily represented who I was before responsibilities. And I represented what? I asked. He didn't answer. That was the moment. Not the text, not the cancellation, not the family pressure. This. The realization that he didn't see me as a partner, only as a phase he was supposed to grow into. I'm done, I said calmly. There's nothing left to discuss. His face hardened. You're throwing everything away. No, I replied. I'm choosing myself. I closed the door gently. Just finality. That evening, I did something small but symbolic. I changed my mailing address, updated my accounts, returned a few unopened wedding gifts to the senders with a brief note. The wedding won't be happening. Thank you for understanding. As I lay in bed that night, I felt something unfamiliar bloom in my chest. Not relief, power. Not over him, but over my own life. The truth was out. The fog was gone. The doubt had nowhere left to hide. I wasn't walking away in weakness. I was walking forward in clarity. The fallout didn't happen all at once. It unfolded like a slow collapse, quiet at first, then impossible to ignore. Once the screenshots began circulating, Daniel lost control of the story he'd been so carefully shaping. Friends who had defended him went silent. Family members who'd pressured me to be reasonable stopped calling. The same people who had questioned my stability suddenly had questions of their own. Daniel's mother tried once more. She called in the evening, her voice tight and clipped. You didn't have to make this public. I didn't, I replied calmly. The truth did that on its own. She hung up without another word. The group chats shifted. Conversations that once excluded me now froze when my name appeared. Invitations quietly disappeared. For him. People didn't confront Daniel directly. They simply stopped engaging. He wasn't invited to drinks. He wasn't asked to help plan anything. He was still present, technically, but no longer trusted. And trust, once cracked, doesn't shatter loudly. It erodes. Daniel tried to reach me again, emails this time, longer, more reflective. Apologies wrapped in explanations, accountability softened by fear. He wrote about regret, about panic, about how everything had spiraled out of control. What he never wrote was, I was wrong to expect you to accept this, so I didn't respond. The consequences kept stacking. Lily's presence didn't bring him relief the way he'd imagined. Once the fantasy dissolved, what remained was two people bound by secrecy and resentment. Mutual friends noticed the tension immediately. Their appearances together became rare. When they did show up, conversations stalled around them like smoke, and then the family fractures began. Roger, Daniel's father, called me late one night, his voice low and tired. He didn't apologize for his earlier silence. He didn't defend his son either. "I didn't raise him to do this," he said quietly. "I'm sorry you were caught in it." That was all. Daniel's sister removed photos from social media. His mother stopped posting entirely. The curated image of a perfect family supporting a perfect wedding dissolved under the weight of what couldn't be explained away. Meanwhile, I moved forward. Not dramatically, not triumphantly, steadily. I signed the lease on a small corner apartment with more light than I needed and less history than I carried. I unpacked slowly, choosing where things went without asking anyone's opinion. I slept better than I had in months. On what would have been my wedding day, I woke early and drove out of the city. I spent the morning hiking, breathing air that felt clean and earned. No notifications, no speeches, no pretending. Back in Seattle, chaos lingered. Despite the cancellations, some guests still showed up at the venue, confused, overdressed, holding gifts. The staff explained. Phones rang, voices rose. Daniel's mother reportedly tried to argue that there had been a mistake. There hadn't. By evening, everyone knew. I didn't take pleasure in watching his life unravel, but I didn't shield him from it either. I let the natural consequences land where they belonged. 3 months later, the dust had settled. Daniel and Lily were still together, though no one described them as happy. He had moved into a smaller place. His social circle had thinned. His confidence, once effortless, had become brittle. I heard about all of it secondhand because I wasn't watching anymore. The most striking part of the fallout wasn't his loss. It was my absence from it. I wasn't explaining. I wasn't defending. I wasn't healing out loud for anyone else's comfort. I was simply gone. And that, more than anything, changed the balance of power. It arrived as quiet mornings. Mornings where I woke up without bracing myself for someone else's mood. Where my first thought wasn't whether I'd said or done something wrong the night before. Where silence felt spacious instead of tense. In the weeks that followed, I rebuilt my life in small, deliberate ways. I cooked meals I liked without worrying if they were too simple. I reconnected with friends I'd slowly drifted from while trying to keep my relationship afloat. I poured my energy into work, and for the first time in a long while, it felt noticed, valued. I wasn't distracted anymore. I wasn't apologizing for taking up space. The version of myself that emerged surprised me. She was calmer, clearer, less willing to negotiate her worth. People asked how I was doing, expecting heartbreak. I told them the truth. I'm okay. And I was. Not because it hadn't hurt, but because I'd stopped confusing pain with proof that I'd made the wrong choice. Looking back, I understand something I couldn't see before. Love that requires you to shrink is not love. Commitment that asks for silence instead of honesty is not partnership. And maturity is not tolerating betrayal. It's recognizing when a boundary has been crossed and refusing to step back over it. Daniel's text didn't end my life. It exposed it. It showed me the cost of ignoring discomfort, the danger of calling self-erasure understanding. The way people will test how much you'll accept if you keep proving you can endure more. I don't regret walking away. I regret how long it took me to believe I was allowed to. If there's a lesson in all of this, it's not about revenge or winning or watching someone else fall apart. It's simpler and harder than that. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is disappoint people who benefit from you having no boundaries. Sometimes choosing yourself looks like loss before it looks like freedom. And sometimes the best thing that never happens to you is the life you almost accepted because you were afraid to ask for better. I didn't lose a wedding. I gained my future.